As a spectator in the wild world of Stateline Speedway. As you know, we're doing this documentary on Stateline from its inception in 1956 through maybe the first 10 years. That's sort of our time frame that we're focusing in on. And we understand that you kind of were there almost at the beginning.
Oh, it was the beginning, yeah.
How did?
Of course, we left there from the old Stateline Speedway.
So where did you live?
Or left Stateline to go to Stateline. We lived in Sherrad.
So you lived in Sugar Grove, and
so we were, if we had to, we could walk home.
Was there a lot of interest in the neighborhood about this? The drivers, how'd you get your interest in this?
Well, there were several drivers in Sherrad Grove at one time. Leonard Briggs, Marv Thorpe,
Right.
Red Brown. Seems like there was some others too.
And just being in the area and knowing that Skyline, of course, was in Sugar Grove. Now you would have been a kid at that time going up there.
Well, let's see.
In 50.
Stateline opened, I think I was probably 14 or 15.
Okay. Okay. Did you have a sense? Did you know any of the family members? Did you know the Briggses or the?
Knew all of them.
Knew them all?
They were neighbors, you know. Yeah.
Was there a buzz in the community about this idea of a track being created in bus type?
Well, I'm sure that when both tracks were built, I'm sure there was people that says, "Oh, these guys are going to lose their shirt." You know, there's no such thing as racing in this area, but it's still going.
Yeah. Was there do you get a reason why Leonard decided to do the track at Stateline as opposed to just staying with it, Skyline?
Well, I think there was a major falling out with one of the other owners of Skyline.
Is that right?
So Leonard and Don and Jerry and Marv and Lloyd, they went up, bought that piece of worthless property up on the Courtright Road.
Yeah.
A lot of clay, so that's where they built their track.
Did you know was it the Coons family that owned Skyline?
Right. Cliff Coons.
Who were the partners up there at Skyline? Cliff and who else?
Leonard and Marv, I think. I don't think Don and Jerry were in it.
Have you ever heard the name Lowell White?
Oh yeah. Be Tony's brother.
Could he have been a partner in Skyline?
He could have been. You could be right. I'm just not sure.
So you don't have a sense as to what the falling out was about, do you?
No.
How long did Skyline race after Stateline got started?
Well, not very long, I don't think. Maybe 2 years maximum, I would guess.
So, I mean, basically, Stateline, once it got started, it really took a bite into Skyline.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah. Well, then Skyline, if I remember right, said that if you race at Stateline, you can't race here. We won't pay you, or something to that effect. And I recall one time they had just short of a riot.
Really?
Fans were out on the track. Yeah. Oh, it was a bad news deal, I'll tell you.
At Skyline?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was bad. And that didn't last, I don't know, a year or two after Stateline started.
So it seems logical that group of guys, of which Leonard may have been an owner with Skyline, just decided to break away, do its own thing, and
yeah.
Did you get a sense that the gate, the guaranteed fees, or their purse would have been greater at Stateline than Skyline? Did you get any sense of that?
I don't know, because I can't remember. I probably heard at the time what they'd pay for first place, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
I can remember when it got to $1,000 for late model to win first place. That was big money.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That was all the money there was in the world.
So here you are, a 14-year-old going to Stateline for the first time and probably walking in and looking around. at the track. And what was your sense of it? Was it that much different than Skyline?
Oh yeah, Skyline was it was a practically round. It was that was a bull ring, and Stateline had straightaways.
Okay.
But you sat in the bleachers in Stateline, you could just barely see the top of the cars on the backstretch.
Was that right?
The infield was so high. And they eventually cut the infield down, and I assume probably stockpiled the clay, or possibly as they needed clay, they took it off the infield and put it right on the track. But yeah, I can remember you could just barely see the roof of the cars on the backstretch.
Those first couple of years, did you have a particular favorite driver?
There was a lot of favorite drivers. You know, Emery was a favorite driver. Squirt Johns and Bobby Snars and oh, there's got to be many. Well, Marvin started driving again. Mm-hmm. In fact, Marvin bought a 58 or 59 Dodge off of Dean Layfield, and he'd started driving again. And that, I think maybe when he started driving, he'd sold his partnership out.
When you hear the name Dean Layfield, at least when I was a young kid going there, he was sort of elevated above other folks. Just that, I'm not sure why that was.
He was a winner.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a winner.
Is there anything distinctive in his driving style that you?
I don't know about his driving style, but his number was distinctive, 9/16.
Yeah, right.
He had exhaust that came out through the roof, if I remember right, on at least one car, if I remember. And he quite often, maybe this was when Skyline was still running. Well, anyway, it doesn't make any difference. But quite often he'd come into Sugar Grove early and he'd stop at Mars, and that's where he'd get his car all serviced and ready for Saturday night. I remember that. And I can recall, I'll tell you another story about Marv. When he first started racing again, he had, now I say again, this is from when he raced back in the 40s probably, a Hudson. He bought a kid's car in Sugar Grove. I think it was a 55 Pontiac. And before he had this Dodge, I think before he had the Dodge. And anyway, he had the car sitting out back of his garage. He'd overhauled it or whatever. Anyway, just sitting out there idling real fast, and sat right out there and blew up. So that was the end of the Pontiac for a while.
Do you remember the first night at Stateline? Do you remember anything about that first race?
No. I can remember it cost $1 or $1.10 or $1.15 to get into races, something like that.
Remember who won? First race?
Probably Emery.
And you're right. Emery
Yeah.
That was a quick quiz.
And then, of course, in '57, Emery came along with the fuel-injected Chevy, and now he put on some driving lessons for the boys wherever he went. Emery was good.
Yeah. Was the late model field at the time? Do you remember? Was it a large number of cars, small number of cars? Just I'm thinking, trying to get a handle on the entries.
I would say that the field of cars for a feature would probably be around 18 cars. I would guess would be an average.
Mm-hmm. And of that group, if we were to mention a Squirt Johns and number 511, what's that mean to you sitting in the stands?
Oh, you know, I think everybody came to watch Bobby Snars and Squirt Johns.
Right?
I really do. I mean, I don't think there was a person up there that didn't like either one of them. I mean, they were the stars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you get a sense they were a fan draw. I mean.
Oh, certainly.
Did the guys like Lloyd Williams, who was the public address announcer and publicist, I guess, did they go out of the way to feature some of these guys to create some fan interest?
Well, I don't know whether they did that or not. I know Lloyd was a good friend. I mean, a dear friend. I worked with Lloyd.
Did you?
Oh yeah, I could. Some good stories about riding back and forth to work with Lloyd, and
Let's hear 'em.
but I can't tell them.
Good story.
No, Lloyd was a nice guy.
No, you worked with him where?
Marlon Rockwell.
Marlon Rockwell?
Yeah.
And what was his sense of take on Stateline? I mean, here he was, one of the owners, and he had I guess, a specific role there, didn't he?
Well, I think he was the announcer, and I suppose he was maybe the promoter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what he did for promoting, I just don't know.
Did he ever reflect on the roles of the other guys, Don and Jerry and Leonard?
Well, no, not that I recall, but I think they all had their own role.
Mm-hmm.
Leonard, he was like the handyman.
Mm-hmm.
Don always took care of the lawn mowing and a lot of other things. And I can recall one time the fire department in Sugar Grove had the concession stand in the pit. And in come Don. Oh, he was really upset. He'd lost his billfold. And he says, I just found it. He was brush hogging and it fell out of his pocket. It was out in the parking lot in about 1,010,000 pieces. Oh, yeah, that poor guy was sick.
That's terrific. And was there a first among equals? You know, they had four partners. They were at least financially equal interest. But was there a guy that sort of ran the big picture?
I would say Leonard was. It always appeared that way,
Right.
as if Leonard was like the president.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether that's the case or not, I don't know. But it always appeared that way to me.
Yeah. Did you have access to the pits? As a fan, did you often try to get into the pits?
Never.
Never.
I go after every race. After I got married, even we'd always go to the pits after every race.
Is that right?
Yeah, always did. Of course, so many people that we knew, you know, other fans, and I remember a guy telling me one time. He says, "Well, you think that track's rough?" Now this is back in the '50s, and they still crab and bitch about rough tracks. He says, "Walk around that some night after races." He says, "I'll guarantee you'll fall down before you get all the way around it." And I don't think they're any different now. I mean, the tracks get rough.
Right.
It's dirt. It gets rough.
Right.
But yeah, we always went to the pits.
Did you ever take a car and go out and
Oh, we were in I had a twin brother. He died in '97. And we were in cahoots with Vance Shagla. He had an old 49 or 50 Ford, F-126. So you know where Bear ended up with his number to start with. So that's when they had the old jalopy races. So we'd go up there, and of course they'd let you in there in the evening and practice a little bit back then. I remember going around the track with that car one time, and boy, this thing's really going. Probably was doing 45, you know. Hit the turn, and I come so close to falling out of the seat. Well, gosh, you gotta have the seat belt tight, I guess. I almost fell out of the seat. But yeah, and I just talk about speed and tell a little story about Bear Shagla. When he was racing spectator class, well, maybe it was a cadet even. He says, I was going faster than I ever went in my life. And he says, Dick Barton passed me twice in one lap.
That's a funny story. During those early days, I'm going to again continue to. Well, would you have that? Why don't we show them that? See, we're going to show you is what looks like a bunch of baseball cards of stock, late model stock car drivers in the 50s, early 60s.
65, actually, Ron. These are from 65.
And maybe you got a memory or two.
Where'd you get these? Oh,
Say what pops into your head as you
Well,
look
I can't-
over each guy.
Johnny Whitehead, he was a hard guy to keep control of, I know. Russ Thompson used to have an awful time finding him sometimes, but then he knew where to call up to Mayville to find him, I guess. And Sammy Lamacusa, of course, I remember when he came to the old Skyline track in that little coupe, that old 27L.
Yep.
And Jim Scott, he was always rubbing against the wall. I think he had a sign on the back of his car, "Hello Wall." If I remember right, he finally had that wrote on the back of his car. Of course, Tom Dill, you know, he must have had a riot there. Still remember rolling that guy's car over, putting it up on top of the guardrails for him.
Tell us about that
What
one.
was it? The guy wanted him to try the car out because it was pulling to the right or something. And he pulled to the right. He put it right up on the guardrails for the guy. Where'd you get these?
Pretty neat, ain't they?
Larry Parmenter. Where was he from? Northeast? Had a beautiful car, I can remember. It was just like a tank. Of course, it's, you know, what can you say about Bobby Snars? I mean, he was the star.
What made him so good, you sense?
Won a lot of races.
Yeah.
And he was smooth. And he didn't show up every week like some do and did with the car all banged up. And I can remember he used to go to the Atlantic Station in Sugar Grove, if I've got this story right, and buy Firestone Supreme tires because they had kind of like an inner liner in them. And that's what he would run. Now, I don't know. This was the early years of Stateline, I'm sure. Where'd you get these?
I'll tell you about it sometime.
You know, some of these guys like Floyd Thomas, I'd forgot about.
That's why we bring him out.
His wife, did he have a son?
I don't know.
His wife or family used to sit right down in front of us, right in front of the judge's stand. Mrs. Ruhlman sat there. Kenny Shearer's wife sat right there. Johnny Ditch, and I can remember him, but I don't remember anything about him. Yeah, I can remember these numbers. Oh, Floyd, there's one of Floyd's head back here. Remember Frank Liffner?
Yeah?
And Frank Liffner and, what was Floyd's brother? Bud.
Bud.
They were in the racing business together. And I don't recall what they drove. But they had, I can remember Floyd telling Frank Liffner one time, he says, well, let's do this. He says, I just got an idea overnight, and he says, I think this will work. And Frank told him, he says, forget it. He says, I lose too much sleep over your ideas. that was the end of that. And of course, Ronnie Blackmer, I mean, there was another winner. How he could put that little coupe around the track, you know. Pretty good people up there then. Who was hid over here? Komisarski. I can't remember him, but he was from where? Edinburgh or Erie? You didn't want this back, did you?
At least for now, he wants it back. We use it as a prop for people that their memories come back pretty quickly. When you would go into the pits after the race, did you ever notice the drivers kind of having a sense of emotion against maybe other drivers or pit crew against other pit crew based on things that went on in the track?
I never seen anything go bad in the pits. I mean, after the races. Maybe I was in the wrong place or maybe I was in the right place. But I never seen any tempers.
Yeah.
Don't ever remember seeing any tempers.
Which drivers were really good at interacting with the fans after the races?
Well, from what I could see, all of them were. I mean, if they won, there was a crowd. And it was that way all the time we were going to races and went in the pits.
Did they ever let the fans onto the track at the end of the race for, you know, the feature winner, and then the fans would come on the track and get to meet them or something? Or do you remember anything?
Oh, yeah, I think, I'm not sure whether people went down and got their picture taken with them or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But after the races, we always went out on the track and walked to the pits that way, because you went the other way, you had to stand that darn gate and wait and wait and wait and get shoved around.
Yeah.
And it was usually some big guy who had half a buzz on, you know, and he was ready to lick the world. One time, my dad used to take my brother and I to the races when he worked up there with the fire department, when the fire department had all the concessions. And he was,
Sugar Grove.
yeah, Sugar Grove Fire Department. And he was working on the back side of the track, probably in the beer stand or something at night. And so after the races, we always sat over by the judges' stand, or down toward the pit at that time. We had to see every cart went in and out, you know. So we walked over on the back side of the track after the races to make sure we didn't miss him, or make sure he didn't miss us. And here's this guy sitting in the stands. I mean, big guy. Drunker than a skunk, you know. My brother and I walked by and he looked at us and we looked at him, and that was the wrong thing to do. He says, "How would you like me to beat you up?" We never went over on the backside of that track again. that was the end of that. Now you talk about a couple of wimps. Now we were out of there.
Isn't that interesting?
Rod, do you know of the financial arrangements between the fire department and the owners of the racetrack? I mean, did they lease those concessions? Did they run them for a percentage? How did that work?
They worked on a 60-40 percentage. Fire department got 60, the racetrack got 40.
After the cost of the product, like the beer, you got to
Yeah.
pay for it, obviously. You know.
That's my recollection. I think I'm right. And then they lost all the concessions. I believe it was Leonard says, "We want to take over the concessions ourselves, and we'll leave you the pop concession." Well, that's the least profit. Well, the fire department says, "No, if we can't have all of it, we're not going to take any." So they didn't have any. Well, then a few years later, it went on, and they come back and want to know if we would take over the concession in the pit. "We'll give you 50%. So we thought, well, we better do it. They said that they hadn't been making any money. They'd been leasing it out to somebody and they hadn't been making any money. Well, the first year we split $6,000 at 50-50. We split $6,000. That's pretty good profit in that little stand.
Yeah.
Of course, you always have such a hard time getting help every week, and just terrible. But we'd get one fella and tell him, "Hey, get your golfing buddies." So they'd all his golfing buddies would go up there and they'd get into races for nothing and suck up a few beers and have a couple of hot dogs, and everybody was happy. And then I used to take care of all the groceries for the pit stand, and three of us used to help set it up every Saturday. We'd go up at 4 o'clock and have our supper, and Don and Jerry'd come over and have hot dogs. And of course, I was a little bit frugal, still probably am, and I'd take all the ketchup bottles and I'd rinse them out with a little bit of vinegar and dump them in another bottle. Throw nothing away.
Were you buying the groceries from Jerry and Don's father?
No, we were getting them at Flickinger's.
Oh, at Flickinger's.
Yeah.
Okay.
And finally, Jerry said one night, he says, "How come this ketchup tastes like vinegar. Oh. He says, what are you doing, rinsing the bottles out with vinegar? I didn't know that. Well, I fixed that, rinsed them out with water after that.
Called your, yeah. Oh, geez. Was there a consistent, crowd-wise, did you just get a sense that it was, they had loyal followings, Ron, like you? It's many of the same people every night, sit in the same locations, sort of like a church service, so people tend to...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
The same people. Every week, you knew the same people that were there, and they sat in the same place, and don't sit in their seat. There might be trouble. I mean...
Really?
Of course, we always had where we wanted to sit, too. But
Still do sit in the same seat?
I don't go anymore.
Don't you really?
No.
When you sat, where did you sit? What was your location?
Of course, when we first started going, my brother and I, we sat down toward the pit.
Okay.
Then we just gradually moved up, and then my wife and I started sitting in front of the judges' stand after I got married.
Mm-hmm. Did Lloyd Williams have a unique style of announcing?
Nah, I wouldn't call it unique.
Yeah, no.
He said what he said the first week is exactly what he said the last week. You could have put a tape recorder up there sometimes to do the same thing, but I mean, he was a good announcer, though. You could, of course, back then he didn't have so many cars to memorize either.
Right.
No, I don't know how an announcer does it anymore.
Didn't Lloyd have some pet phrases that he would use on a regular basis? You remember any of them?
No, but now you mentioned that there was, seems like he said something when they played the Star Spangled Banner. And he always said something the last thing at night. Something about drinking and driving, the life you save may be your own, or I can't remember, but now you mentioned, he did have some kind of pet phrases.
During those years, again, we had guys like Hyle Russell and Eddie Kisco. You mentioned Dean Layfield and Billy Layfield. Do those guys have any specific memories for you? Frank Ruhlman had that group of three, Kisco, Russell, and Ronnie. Anything jump out as a fan that would be unique?
Well, those cars showed up every week in A1 condition.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it just seemed like those cars it seems like those motors were winding up tighter than any motors that you heard out there. I remember one guy saying, gosh, he says it sounds like the valves are floating in them.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they were. But that was a Class A operation there.
This is Frank's operation, yeah.
Yeah, one man and taking care of three cars. I mean, that's quite an undertaking.
From the fans' perspective, Frank Ruhlman, again, had Kisco, Russell, Blackmore at one point. Anything unique about his cars that were different than maybe the other cars that you're aware of?
No, I can't. There were so many good cars back then.
Right.
You know, just so many good ones.
Which guys, Ron, made the transition from Skyline to Stateline? Which guys do you remember from Skyline who then started appearing at Stateline?
Well, there'd be Bobby Snars and Squirt. I'm not sure Johnny Ditch. It just seems like I can remember his name from Skyline, but I'm just not sure. And of course, I think Hyle Russell and Eddie Kisco.
Do you remember a man named Joe Sonner?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
What do you remember about him?
Another beautiful car. Was it number 18? And of course, going back Skyline a little bit, but I remember I used to go to Skyline and every week, one night during the week in practice. And then of course on the state line, but, I mean, there was a class gentleman as far as I can remember.
Do you remember Jughead Pierce?
Mm-hmm.
You love it when he smiles. 'Cause, you know, he's got something to say.
Well, there's so many stories that I've heard about Jughead, you know, that I probably shouldn't repeat them because you'd like to know, some of you'd like to think weren't true.
Well, we've heard most of them, so go ahead.
Like beer in the fire extinguisher, and somebody said that one time, maybe you'll want to edit this, but it seems like they said that Don Frank was putting up the money for the one car he had. Well, Jughead would get the fenders all messed up, and I think it was a 57 Chevy, and of course he couldn't afford to buy another fender, you know, and the other one was so bad, so he was making them out of cardboard. But
We've heard that.
and of course, a little side note, my oldest daughter got good friends with his son.
Billy?
No, Mike.
Mike.
Yeah. And they moved to Florida together. Jughead come up and got him. Tow barred with his car, Mike's car, all the way to Florida. Tow barred. They sat right in front of the house and he's hooking the wires up. He says, I'm not too sure I need these, but I better hook them up. So they was telling me down in Florida, and he was road testing somebody's car going down the road, and I guess he was just going flat out, probably 100 miles an hour. And he says, looks in the mirror, and here comes a cop. Boy, he says, I hit the brakes and pulled over and jumped out and raised the hood, and the cop pulled up, and he says, what are you doing? He says, don't you just hate that? He says, when the throttle sticks in your car. And, you know, just as a side note. And he was telling, who was it? I think it was Court Jordan and I. He was telling about he was working for Don Gage, or he went someplace with Don Gage to pick up a car years ago, and they was going out in New York State somewhere, and slippery and heck, and he says, that Gage had just about wide open, he says. Slippery, he says. And finally he says, Don, he says, I know you don't drink, but he says, would you stop so I could get one? That Jughead, he was a character. The only one like him.
Does he get back here at all?
He was here not too long ago, I think, or within the last year or two, I think he was here.
Yeah.
Somebody said they'd seen him.
Well, it's